Would you agree that Anne Neville is one of the most forgotten queens of England? But what is the reason? Is it because she had the misfortune of being the wife of two men history does not remember fondly, Edward of Westminster and Richard III? Or is it because she wore the crown for only 2 short years and was overshadowed by other, more prominent women of her time? But in today's video, I want to show you Anne from a side you haven't seen before. This is the story of a pawn who became the second White Queen. Anne Neville's life reads almost like a guide through the bloodiest years of 15th century England. Although, to be honest, we know very little about her fate, and most of what we do know has reached us only through the stories of the men she was connected to. She was born on June 11th, 1456, into a family already deeply involved in the rivalry that was tearing England apart. And by the way, you're already a little familiar with this family. A few days ago, I told you about Cecily Neville and her clan of 22 children. Well, Anne's father, Richard Neville, came from that very family and was Cecily's nephew. And if you've forgotten, royal blood ran in the veins of the Nevilles, and therefore in Anne's veins as well. Anne and her older sister Isabel grew up in Middleham Castle in Yorkshire, a fortress that was both their home and a centre of Yorkist ambition. And interestingly, in that same household, growing up alongside the girls, were George of Clarence and Richard of Gloucester, the sons of Richard, Duke of York, and Cecily Neville, the very men who would later become their husbands. So you could say that both sisters knew their future husbands almost from the cradle. But Anne's childhood was far from carefree. Warwick was one of the leading supporters of the Yorkist cause, determined to overthrow Henry VI. The walls of the castle may have been thick, but news of battles, betrayals, and executions still reached her ears. The fall of one noble family could mean the destruction of another, and Anne knew that her father's fate could one day mirror that of the Duke of York, whose head had been placed on a spike, and that she, her mother, and her sister could lose everything at any moment. But for a time, fortune favoured the White Rose of York. Soon, Edward, the son of the Duke of York, became king, and the girl's father, who had played a key role in helping him take the throne, gained widespread fame as the kingmaker. Wealth and influence poured into the Neville household, and Anne's position changed dramatically, from vulnerable to highly privileged. She became one of the most valuable heiresses in England. But their family's triumph did not last long. The relationship between Edward IV and Warwick began to fall apart when the king chose Elizabeth Woodville as his wife. She was a relatively poor widow, and her sudden rise not only ruined Warwick's plans for Edward's marriage, but also meant that the wealth and privileges once meant for the Neville family began to shift into the hands of the Woodvilles. And that did not sit well with the ambitious Earl. Tensions only grew stronger when Edward refused to allow his brothers to marry either Isabel or Anne. The message was clear. Warwick was already powerful enough, and Edward feared what might happen if he gained even more influence. Stripped of these alliances, Warwick turned against the very king he had helped to place on the throne. He found a willing ally in Edward's ambitious brother, George, Duke of Clarence, who had begun to imagine himself on the throne, openly challenged Edward, secretly marrying Isabel in 1469. And soon, the conflict between former allies escalated so far that the Neville family was forced to flee England. As I mentioned earlier, every single day of life in that time was turbulent, and Anne's life, just like her sister's, was entirely in their father's hands. He decided their fate as he saw fit. And during that escape, tragedy struck. On board the ship, Isabel gave birth to a stillborn child, and I think, for Anne, that loss must have been something she could never truly forget. Once in France, Warwick abandoned his support for the Yorkists and instead offered himself to the Lancastrians, more precisely to Margaret of Anjou. He promised to restore Henry VI to the throne and sealed the alliance with a marriage. Anne was to marry Edward, the Prince of Wales. Barely having reached her teenage years, she was handed over into the care of her father's former enemies. Anne's feelings about the match are lost to history, but the fear she must have carried is not hard to imagine. She had grown up with the Lancastrians painted as her family's sworn rivals, only to be delivered into their camp as a bargaining chip. Whatever her private dread, the wedding went ahead. She became Princess of Wales, and when Warwick's gamble briefly paid off in 1470, Henry VI was restored, and Anne stood as the wife of the heir to the throne. In the series The White Queen, we see a disturbing scene of the consummation of her marriage to a deeply unpleasant husband. In reality, the marriage lasted only about 5 months, and whether it was ever consummated is not known for certain. There are theories that Margaret of Anjou, who did not trust Warwick, preferred to wait and kept a close watch over the young couple. And honestly, I truly hope that Anne never had to share his bed, because he was certainly no prince of dreams. Because Edward of Westminster, at least based on contemporary descriptions, if they were accurate, was something very close to Joffrey Baratheon. He was a young man, raised in war and in a constant struggle for the throne, and he was said to have had rather sadistic tendencies. So it's quite possible that for Anne, the death of her husband at the Battle of Tewkesbury felt more like a release. Although even if she did not mourn her husband, just a few weeks earlier, she had also lost her father. And suddenly, Anne found herself in an incredibly vulnerable position. She was left without protection in a world where survival depended entirely on powerful men. Worse still, she was the widow of the king's enemy. Captured by the Yorkists, she was taken into the household of her sister and Clarence. Life under Clarence's roof may have saved Anne from prison, but it was not an act of kindness. His true motive was control. By keeping Anne close, he could claim her share of Warwick's vast inheritance. But Anne was no longer willing to remain a pawn in the hands of yet another man. She wanted to take control of her own fate, and she made a decision that, for that time, was almost unprecedented. There is a beautiful legend that Anne escaped from Clarence's custody disguised as a servant, hiding in a pastry shop, where Richard eventually found her and took her to a church where she sought sanctuary. Another version claims that George himself had hidden Anne from his brother, also disguising her as a servant. But either way, Anne managed to break free from Clarence's control and she accepted Richard's help. So was it love for Richard, or simply a desire to claim a share of Anne's wealth? Personally, I tend to think that, considering he actually had to give up part of her inheritance, there must have been something more, something genuine between them. Although, of course, historians still have very different views on Richard's true motivations. Their long-awaited wedding took place on July 12th, 1472, in Westminster Abbey. And, by the way, if you suddenly imagined that poor Anne had married some kind of deformed hunchback, I'm going to surprise you. In reality, Richard was not nearly as grotesque as we tend to imagine, largely thanks to William Shakespeare and Tudor propaganda. He was a man with a strong, well-developed upper body, which suggests that he spent a great deal of time fighting and training with a sword. Yes, he did have a curvature of the spine, and one shoulder was higher than the other. But it was nothing like the exaggerated, almost monstrous image we often see. In fact, thanks to the discovery of his remains, we now know quite a lot about what he actually looked like. There's even a facial reconstruction. So, Anne didn't marry a monster at all, but a rather handsome man who was only about 4 years older than her, which, honestly, was a much better match than being married off to some elderly nobleman. The couple moved to the very castle where they had once spent time together as children, and just a year later, they had a son, Edward of Middleham. And from everything we know, this seems to have been a happy marriage. For example, there are records suggesting that even after they became king and queen, they continued to sleep in the same bed every night, something that was quite rare at the time, and was often seen as a sign of closeness between husband and wife. Historians who have studied records of Anne's household expenses also note that she appears to have had a certain degree of independence within the marriage, making many decisions on her own. And perhaps, after everything she had been through in the first half of her life, Anne might finally have found some kind of family happiness and a sense of stability. But the sudden death of Edward IV changed everything, not only Anne's fate, but the course of English history itself. Richard, who had initially been appointed protector of his young nephews, soon declared them illegitimate and claimed the throne for himself. In the series The White Queen, Anne is shown as the one who gives the order to kill the princes. But I wouldn't be so quick to place that blame on her. After all, there were far too many interested parties involved. And some modern theories even suggest that one of the boys may have survived and lived under another name. But one thing we do know for certain, Anne supported her husband in his actions. It was she who presented Richard with the purple fabric for their coronation robes. They were both dressed in that colour as a symbol of unity, and their coronation became the first joint coronation in 175 years. As Queen, she also supported Richard in his travels and in diplomatic matters. For example, she was present at negotiations aimed at arranging the marriage of their son, Edward, to one of the daughters of Isabella I of Castile and Ferdinand II of Aragon. A powerful alliance, the very kind of union that years later Henry VII of England would successfully secure for his own son. But neither Richard nor Anne knew that the future they had imagined for their family would never come to life, because in truth, there was no future waiting for them. Their only son died in 1484, a devastating loss for both Anne and Richard, not only on a personal level, but politically as well. Without an heir, Richard's position was weakened, and Anne could no longer give him another. Soon after, Anne's own health began to fail. According to contemporary accounts, she spent 2 months in bed, most likely suffering from tuberculosis. Anne Neville died at the age of just 28 in March 1485, during a solar eclipse which many saw as an ominous sign. Symbolically, her own light was extinguished. Richard remained by her side until the very end. However, soon rumours began to spread through the court that Richard had poisoned her in order to marry his niece, Elizabeth of York. This was most likely not true. Elizabeth of York would have been one of the most dangerous possible brides for Richard, and in fact, soon after Anne's death, negotiations began for his marriage to a Portuguese princess, which means that his niece was clearly never part of his marriage plans. But by then, Richard's reputation had already been deeply damaged. His nephews had mysteriously disappeared, and now his young wife was dead. Anne was buried in Westminster Abbey, but she never received a tomb, a monument, or even a proper marker. Soon after her death, her husband was killed at the Battle of Bosworth Field, and there was no one left to take care of the memory of a woman who had been Queen of England for 2 short years. And only in 1960, more than 5 centuries later, was the place of her burial officially recognised with a simple bronze plaque placed on a nearby wall. And as for Richard, the fate of his body was tragic in its own way. He was only found and reburied as a king in 2012. Do you think this was some kind of twist of fate for the two of them? A kind of reckoning for the 2 young princes in the Tower who never received proper burials of their own? Personally, I can't help but feel that it would have been right if Anne and Richard had been reunited after death and laid to rest side by side. After all, their fates were always inseparably intertwined. Anne Neville's story, in many ways, reflects the fate of countless women of her time, caught in a world where their lives were shaped by the ambitions of men. And yet, there is something deeply unique about her. She lived a short but remarkable life, becoming both a Princess of Wales and a Queen of England, while enduring loss, pain, and constant uncertainty. And still, history often leaves her in the shadows. But if we take a closer look, we begin to see her differently. Not just as a pawn, but as the second White Queen, a woman who truly was part of shaping Yorkist history. What do you think about her story? And did you like how she was portrayed in The White Queen? Personally, I liked her character up until her marriage to Richard. But after that, she was turned into yet another stereotypical, power-hungry woman. Share your thoughts in the comments, leave your royal like, and give this video some hype if you enjoyed it. And I'll see you in the next one.